The Cessna 206's engine didn't sputter. It didn't cough or wheeze or give any warning at all. At 8,000 feet over the Alaskan tundra, it just stopped, a silence so complete that Marcus Harrison heard his own heartbeat before the wind scream began. Preparation is a mindset. Survival is a tactic. This is Expert Survival Guide. The prop windmiled uselessly. Ice crystals spider-webbed across the windshield. In the right seat, Bush pilot Danny Kruger's hands moved through the restart sequence fuel pump. Mixture, magnetos, but Marcus already knew. 22 years in Army Special Forces teaches you the difference between a problem and a death sentence. This was somewhere in between. LZ options. Marcus's voice was level, automatic, the tone he'd used in a dozen helicopters over a dozen countries when the situation went from bad to worse. There. Danny pointed at a break in the white. A frozen lake. Maybe. We're gonna hit hard. The tundra rushed up. No trees for reference. No depth perception. Just white and more white and then impact. The sound of aluminum crumpling. The windshield exploding inward. Marcus's head snapping sideways into something solid. The seatbelt cutting into his ribs like a garrote. Then quiet again. Different quiet. The kind that comes with ringing ears and the taste of copper. He couldn't breathe. The belt was locked, crushing his chest. His right hand clawed at the buckle jammed. Blood roared in his ears, vision tunneling. His left hand found the K-bar, muscle memory, the same draw he'd practiced 10,000 times. The leather handle settled into his palm like a handshake from an old friend. The blade whispered out of its sheath, a sound he'd heard in 100 tight spots, from Mogadishu alleys to Kandahar compounds. He slashed upward. The carbon steel bit through nylon webbing in one stroke. The belt released. Air flooded his lungs. Marcus turned his head, slowly. Everything hurt. Danny wasn't moving. The cockpit was compressed by 2 feet on the right side. The instrument panel had folded into Danny's chest like a metal fist. The K-bar was still in Marcus's hand, blade slick with his own blood from where he'd cut too close. He had 72 hours before hypothermia, or the wolves found him. The knife had outlived better men. Now it had to outlive one more night. Marcus Flint Harrison retired from 3rd Special Forces Group in 2009. He'd spent 2 decades teaching SERE survival, evasion, resistance, escape to soldiers who might end up behind enemy lines. He'd trained them to make fire with ice, to navigate by stars, to survive on insects and rainwater. But that was theory. Controlled environments. Instructors watching from tree lines with radios and medkits. This was different. The crash site sat somewhere between the Kuskokwim River and the Yukon Delta, a moonscape of frozen bog and dwarf willows that stretched 200 miles in every direction. No roads, no settlements. The flight plan had them arriving at a remote hunting cabin by 1400 hours. When they didn't show, someone would notice, eventually. But the ELT emergency locator transmitter had sheared off in the impact. Marcus had checked. Twice. He was 58 years old. His right knee had 3 pins from a Fallujah door breach. His lower ribs felt wrong grinding when he breathed deep, and Danny Kruger, the best bush pilot in Bethel, was dead in the seat beside him. The temperature was dropping. He could feel it. October in Alaska doesn't give warnings. The sun was already tracking low, painting the tundra in shades of bronze and shadow. In 6 hours it would be dark. In 12, the temperature would hit 0 Fahrenheit. Marcus looked down at the K-bar. The blade still had his blood on it, already freezing in the October air. He wiped it clean on his jeans. The motion was automatic. Reverent, almost. This knife had tasted blood before. Plenty of it. Enemy blood in Somalia. Friendly blood when he'd cut tourniquets and pressure dressings. His own blood, now, from a seat belt that could have killed him. The steel showed its age. 22 years of hard use had left marks, a patina of dark oxidation, where blood had etched the carbon steel, lighter streaks, where his whetstone had worn the metal smooth. There was a nick near the tip from a firefight in Helmand Province when he'd used it to pry open an ammunition crate. Another deeper gouge halfway down the blade. He couldn't remember where that one came from. Too many missions. Too many years. But the edge was still sharp. That mattered more than cosmetics. Drop your city in the comments. Let's see where the Expert Survival Guide community is watching from. Are you in Alaska? The lower 48? Somewhere else entirely? And here's the real question. What's the oldest piece of gear you still trust your life to? Knife? Multi-tool? Compass? Let me know. The first rule of SERE: assess. Don't react. Don't panic. Think. Marcus forced himself to inventory, methodically, the way he'd done it 100 times in training scenarios, except this time there was no instructor to call index and hand him a hot coffee. Physical status: head throbbing, likely concussion. Vision clear. Ribs painful but not punctured. He could breathe without hearing wet sounds. Right hand functional. Left hand functional, bleeding from the seatbelt cut, but superficial. Legs responding. No arterial bleeding. Pain level manageable. He'd operated through worse. Immediate environment: Cessna 206 wreckage. Nose crumpled, right side compressed. Fuel smell strong. Avgas leaking from ruptured wing tank, pooling on permafrost. Fire risk. Not immediate but present. Windshield gone. Cabin temp already matching outside air, maybe 35 degrees, dropping. Available resources. This was the critical assessment. Marcus started with Danny. He owed the man that much. The control yoke had crushed his sternum, no bringing him back. But Marcus needed what Danny carried. He used the cowbar to cut through Danny's jacket. The heavy Carhartt was soaked with blood, but the inner layers might still be dry. The knife parted the canvas fabric like it was paper. Inside the jacket's pockets: Zippo lighter, fluid present, wool beanie, insulated gloves, folding Benchmade knife. Marcus kept cutting. Used the cowbar's tip to pop the stitching on Danny's boot inside. Wrapped in a plastic bag was a ferro rod. Bush pilot trick. Backup fire starter where it wouldn't get wet or lost. Smart. The knife was working like it always had. Precise. Reliable. In Kandahar, he'd used the same blade to cut an IED vest off a captured Taliban fighter. Delicate work. One wrong move and everyone died. The cowbar hadn't shaken then. It didn't shake now. Marcus jammed the knife into the aluminum panel securing the kit. Twisted. The metal popped. He'd done the same thing to door hinges in Ramadi. Same principal leverage plus a blade that wouldn't snap. Inside, Mylar emergency blanket, expired road flare, basic first aid kit, water purification tablets, 3 crushed protein bars, paracord, compass. Marcus's personal kit: fleece jacket, ball cap, thin leather gloves, EDC flashlight, 70% battery, Leatherman Wave multi-tool, Kabar USMC knife, the only thing that mattered. Analog watch, working. No sleeping bag, no tent, no stove. Danny had said the cabin was stocked. The cabin didn't matter anymore. Marcus made the calculation every SERE instructor teaches: survival priorities. In this environment, hypothermia was the killer. Shelter first, then fire, then signaling. Water could wait. There was snow everywhere. Food was last. 3 hours until core temperature became critical. He checked his watch. 1447 hours. Sunset around 1900. 4 hours of light remaining. Your knife is your primary tool in a survival scenario. Multi-tools are useful, but when you need to process firewood, build shelter, or defend yourself, you need a fixed blade. Here's why the Kabar design works. Full tang construction. The blade steel runs the entire length of the handle. You can batten with it. Strike the spine with a rock to split wood, without the handle breaking. Carbon steel versus stainless. Carbon steel holds a sharper edge, and is easier to resharpen with improvised materials like river rocks. The trade-off: it rusts. But rust doesn't matter if the blade works. 7-inch blade length, long enough for processing tasks, short enough for detailed work. The Kabar isn't the best at any one thing, but it's good enough at everything. That's what survival tools need to be. Marcus stripped Danny's Carhartt, used the Kabar to cut away the blood-soaked outer shell, preserving the inner fleece lining. The knife's belly, the curved part of the blade, made clean cuts through fabric. That curve was designed for slashing in combat, but it worked just as well for field-expedient tailoring. He layered the fleece over his own jacket. Pulled on Danny's wool beanie. 40% of body heat loss is through the skull. The fuel leak was getting worse. He could smell it intensifying, but the wreckage was also the only windbreak for miles. Decision point. Marcus looked at the Kabar. The blade had a smear of Danny's blood on it now, mixing with his own. He didn't wipe it off this time. Some things you carry. He used the knife to cut the Mylar blanket into 2 sections. each piece about 4 feet square, wrapped one around his torso under the jackets for radiant heat reflection. The second piece he'd saved for shelter roofing. Then he began the critical work. Firewood procurement. The knife went to work on the dwarf willows. Marcus gripped a branch with his left hand, placed the kabar's edge at a 45-degree angle, and struck the spine with a fist-sized rock. Batoning. The blade drove through the green wood like a wedge. 1 strike. 2. The branch split. This was the same technique he'd taught hundreds of students. Your knife is a cutting tool and a splitting tool, he'd say, but only if it's built right. The kabar was built right. He processed 20 branches in 15 minutes. The blade didn't chip, didn't roll. The edge was still sharp enough to shave with. He tested it against the hair on his forearm. Clean cut. In the distance, maybe 400 meters north, he saw a slight rise in terrain. Boulder field. Rocks meant wind protection. Thermal mass to reflect fire heat. He bundled the firewood using strips of paracord, cut with the knife. 40 pounds of fuel. Enough for one night if he was careful. Then Marcus Harrison began walking. Behind him, the Cessna groaned in the cold, metal contracting. Ahead, the sun touched the horizon. And from somewhere in the failing light came the sound that changed everything. A low, rolling howl. Wolves. Marcus's hand went to the kabar. The leather handle was warm from his body heat. The blade had killed men. Tonight it might have to kill again. Wolf protocol is simple in theory. Complex in execution. Don't run triggers, prey drive. Don't show fear, they smell cortisol. Make yourself large. Make noise. Back away slowly. Maintain eye contact. Hope they're not hungry enough to test you. But Marcus wasn't backing away. He was between the wolves and his only shelter option, and the boulder field was still 200 meters north. 4 wolves. Gray-phased timber wolves. Average weight 110 pounds. Pack hunters. Intelligent. The alpha larger, scarred muzzle, stood 15 meters away, head low, calculating. The others fanned out, classic encirclement pattern. Marcus had seen this before. Different continent. Different predator. Feral dogs outside Kandahar, circling a wounded interpreter. The principle was the same. They were testing him, looking for weakness. He gave them the kabar instead. The knife came out in a reverse grip, blade down, edge forward, combat hold, the same grip he'd used in close quarters fighting. The steel caught the dying sunlight, flashing. The alpha's ears twitched. It saw the blade. Predators understand weapons, even if they don't know what they are. Shiny metal that moves means claws, means teeth, means danger. Marcus took 1 step forward, slow, deliberate. The kabar extended. The wolves held position, watching. He needed fire. Right now. But building fire meant turning his back. Meant vulnerability. His left hand went to his jacket pocket, found the road flare. The flare was expired 2019, but magnesium doesn't care about dates. He struck the cap against the primer. Nothing. The alpha took 2 steps closer, lips curled back. Marcus could see the wear on its teeth, an old wolf. Experienced. Dangerous because it had survived this long by knowing when prey was weak. He struck the flare again. The kabar still extended in his right hand. If the alpha rushed, he had maybe 2 seconds to decide. Stab or slash. Stabbing risked the blade getting stuck in bone. Slashing risked not hitting vitals. The flare ignited. Magnesium white light erupted, painting the tundra in harsh shadows. The wolves scattered 20 meters, 30, but they didn't run. The flare burned at 8,000 to 1,100 degrees, casting a 15-foot radius of chemical daylight. 20 minutes of light. Maybe less in this wind. Marcus backed toward the boulders, slow, eyes locked on the alpha. Flare in left hand, kabar in right. The wolves paced parallel, waiting. The boulder field materialized. 10 large rocks, glacial erratics. The largest was 8 feet tall, flat sides. The spaces between formed natural channels. Marcus wedged himself into a gap between 2 boulders, 4 feet wide, 6 feet deep, protected on 3 sides. The wolves circled. The flare hissed and sputtered. 12 minutes of light remaining.
I read the game, everything.
Marcus jammed the flare into a crack in the rockhand's free light. Then he went to work. The Kabar became an extension of his will. He used it to dig, stabbing the tip into frozen lichen, prying up chunks, creating a cleared space for fire. The blade's point was designed for penetration. It worked on permafrost too. Then he began processing tinder. The knife's edge stripped bark from birch branches and long curls nature's paper. The oils in birch bark are waterproof. They burn even when wet. He shaved the bark thinner, creating feather sticks wood curled into fine wisps that would catch spark. This was delicate work. Precision work. The kind of thing you couldn't do with a dull blade or a cheap knife. The Kabar's edge was sharp enough to shave hair. It made feather sticks like they were butter. In SERE school, Marcus had taught this exact technique to hundreds of students. Your knife needs to do 2 jobs, he'd say. Heavy work batoning, prying, chopping, and fine work carving, shaving, detail cutting. If it can't do both, it's not a survival knife. The Kabar did both. He built the fire structure, birch bark nest, feather sticks on top, progressively larger twigs in a teepee formation. Then he pulled out Danny's ferro rod. Scraped the Kabar's spine against the rod. Sparks showered into the tinder. The birch bark caught, smoked, then ignited with that distinctive medicine wood smell. Flame spread, fragile at first, then stronger. Marcus fed it, lichen, twigs, larger willow branches. The fire grew. The road flare died. Darkness slammed down. The fire became the only light, a tiny orange sphere in an ocean of black. Beyond the firelight he could hear them, the wolves, pacing, the crunch of their paws on frost, an occasional low growl. They were waiting. Marcus pulled the mylar section he'd saved and began constructing a heat reflector, used the Kabar to cut willow into stakes, drove them into the ground by striking the knife's pommel with a rock, stretched the mylar between the stakes behind the fire. The result was a crude but functional system. Fire in front, mylar reflecting heat back, boulders blocking wind from 3 sides. Temperature inside the shelter, maybe 50 degrees. Outside, 20 and dropping. He allowed himself 1 protein bar, used the knife to split it into thirds ration discipline. 1/3 now, 2/3 for tomorrow. Then he sat. Back against stone. Kabar across his knees. The blade reflected firelight, orange and dancing. Carbon steel requires care. After cutting through blood, dirt, and wet wood, you need to clean and protect the blade. In ideal conditions, you'd use oil. In survival conditions, you use what you have. Animal fat works, even your own skin oils. Marcus ran his thumb along the Kabar's blade, not testing sharpness, but coating it with sebum from his skin. A thin layer of oil prevents flash rust. It's not perfect, but it's enough. The knife had survived 22 years of worse treatment. As long as the edge held and the blade didn't snap, cosmetic rust didn't matter. Function over appearance. Always. The fire crackled. Marcus's eyes grew heavy, concussion and exhaustion pulling him down. But he couldn't sleep. Not yet. The wolves were still out there. He gripped the Kabar tighter. The leather handle was warm from his hand, worn smooth in the exact spots his fingers had held it for 2 decades. There was a comfort in that, a familiarity. In Mogadishu, he'd held this knife through a 15-hour siege. In Kandahar, he'd used it to cut a friend out of a burning Humvee. The blade had been there for every critical moment. It was here now. His eyes closed. Just for a second. When they opened, the fire was dying. And yellow eyes were watching from 8 feet away. The alpha had entered the camp. The wolf was inside the firelight perimeter. 6 feet away, maybe less. Close enough that Marcus could see the scars on its muzzle. The gray-white fur around its eyes, the intelligence in its gaze. His hand was already on the Kabar, muscle memory. The blade came up smooth. The wolf didn't flinch. This wasn't a charge, this was something else. A test, or maybe a challenge. Alpha to alpha. Marcus's training said, make noise, make yourself large, assert dominance. But his instinct, 22 years of reading situations in the dark, said something different. This wolf wasn't hunting, it was evaluating. So Marcus did the last thing any survival manual would recommend. He stayed still, knife ready, but didn't attack. 10 seconds passed. 20. The wolf's eyes shifted, from Marcus's face to his hand, to the kabar, and something changed in its posture. Not fear, not submission, but recognition, the way one fighter acknowledges another. The wolf turned its head, slowly, deliberately, and walked back into the darkness. The other three followed. Marcus didn't move for a full minute. Then he exhaled a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. His hand was shaking. Not from fear, from adrenaline crash. He looked down at the kabar. The blade was still clean from when he'd wiped it, but in the firelight, he noticed something he'd never seen before. Near the guard, where the blade met the handle, there was an engraving. Tiny. Worn almost smooth by decades of handling. He'd carried this knife for 22 years and never noticed it. Marcus held the blade closer to the flames. Letters etched into the steel. Decay. Brotherhood. 87. His breath caught. Danny Kruger. This was Danny's knife. The memory hit him like a flashbang. Fort Bragg, 1987. Marcus was fresh out of selection, newly assigned to 3rd Group. Danny was a Marine attaché to Special Forces for a joint training op. They'd spent 6 weeks in the North Carolina swamps, running SERE exercises. Last night of the course. Graduation tradition. Everyone exchanged gear. Tokens. Marcus had given Danny his compass. Danny had given him the kabar. Marines issued these to my grandfather in '43, Danny had said. He carried it through Iwo Jima. My dad carried it in Vietnam. I carried it through Beirut. Now it's yours. Bring it back from whatever hell you end up in. Marcus had brought it back. From the Gulf. From Somalia. From Afghanistan. But Danny hadn't made it back from Alaska. The knife wasn't just a tool. It was a legacy. 3 generations of warriors. 4 if you counted Marcus. And now it had saved his life, one more time. Cut the seatbelt that would have suffocated him in the wreckage. Marcus ran his thumb over the engraving. The letters were almost gone, worn away by 2 decades of his own hand. He'd been carrying Danny's family history without even knowing it. The fire was dying. He fed it. 1 branch at a time. The woodpile was getting low. Maybe 3 hours of fuel left. Sunrise was still 5 hours away. Math didn't work. He needed more wood, which meant leaving the shelter, in darkness, with the wolves still out there. But the wolves had left. The alpha had made that choice. Marcus stood, ribs screaming, head pounding. He gripped the kabar Danny's kabar and stepped beyond the firelight. The tundra was a void. No moon, no stars, just blackness and cold. He moved 30 feet from the shelter, found a willow thicket, used the knife to cut branches, working by touch more than sight. The blade sliced through green wood with the same efficiency it always had. 20 branches, 40 pounds. He turned to head back and stopped. In the distance, maybe 2 miles northeast, he saw lights, faint, moving. Not stars, not aurora, lights. A vehicle. Impossible. There were no roads out here. Then he heard it, the sound that changed everything. Whoop, whoop, whoop. Helicopter, flying a search grid. Marcus dropped the firewood. His mind raced. The helicopter was too far away, moving perpendicular to his position. In 60 seconds, it would be gone. He needed a signal, something big. Something they couldn't miss. The wreckage! The Cessna still had fuel in the ruptured tank. Avgas was 100 octane, highly combustible. A beacon visible for 30 miles. But the crash site was 400 meters south, in darkness, across tundra that had nearly broken his ankle 6 hours ago. He had maybe 90 seconds before the helicopter passed out of range. Marcus made the decision. He ran, boots crashing through tussocks, ribs grinding, the kabar gripped in his right hand, not as a weapon, but as a talisman, Danny's knife. Danny's legacy. Bring it back from whatever hell you end up in. The wreckage appeared a black shape against black ground. The fuel smell was overwhelming. Marcus pulled the paracord from his belt, used the kabar to strip the inner strands fast. No time for precision. Soaked one end in the fuel pool. The helicopter sound was fading, moving away. He pulled Danny's Zippo. This was it. Last chance. Struck it. Flame. Touched it to the cord. Fire raced along the line, reached the fuel pool. The explosion turned night into day. Flame climbed 50 feet. Heat like a physical wall. The Cessna's aluminum skin melted. Ammunition cooked off. Pop, pop, pop. Marcus shielded his face. The heat was intense even at 40 feet. He looked up. The helicopter banked hard, searchlight sweeping, coming straight toward him, and then the ground beneath the wreckage gave way. The burning Cessna and Danny's body began sinking into the permafrost bog. The helicopter was a Bell 212 twin-engine, SERE configuration. Marcus knew the silhouette. He'd flown in dozens of them. The searchlight swept across the tundra in hard white beams, fixing on the sinking wreckage, then shifting, hunting for survivors. He waved both arms. The Ka-bar still gripped in his right hand blade, catching the searchlight, flashing. The spotlight found him. Everything went white. Blinding. He kept his arms up. The knife held high. Reflection and signal combined. The bell flared and began its descent. Rotor wash hammered the tundra, kicking up ice crystals and frozen debris. The fire from the wreckage had already dropped 8 feet into the bog-melting permafrost, creating a sinkhole that was swallowing the Cessna whole. Danny was going down with it. Marcus's chest tightened. Not just the ribs, something deeper. "I'm sorry, brother, I tried." The bell touched down 60 feet away. Side door slid open. 2 figures jumped out, one in SAR orange, one in flight suit. The pararescueman ran toward him, medic bag bouncing. "How many?" The PJ shouted over rotor noise. "One survivor," Marcus shouted back. "One deceased." He gestured toward the wreckage, but it was almost gone now. Just flames and black smoke rising from a hole in the earth. In the wreckage, the PJ reached him, hands already assessing. Visual trauma scan, eyes locked on the knife. "You armed for a reason." "Wolves." The PJ nodded, clicked his radio. "Pilot, we have wolf activity. Stay hot." What? Have pilot. We have wolf activity. Stay hot. We'll still living. Stay hot. Then to Marcus. "Can you walk?" "Yeah." "Injuries. Possible rib fracture. Concussion. Mobile." The PJ grabbed his arm. "We need to move. Weather front coming. 20 minutes max." They started toward the helicopter. Marcus's legs felt wrong, sluggish. Hypothermia onset mixing with adrenaline crash. The PJ noticed, tightened his grip. 50 feet from the bell, Marcus heard it. Not rotor wash. Not wind. A growl. He turned. The alpha wolf stood 30 feet away, backlit by the dying fire, bigger than Marcus remembered, easily 130 pounds, scars visible even at this distance. It had followed him, waiting for the moment he'd be most vulnerable. The PJ's hand went to his Hipsig Sauer P320. "Don't move." But Marcus was already moving, not toward the helicopter, toward the wolf. "Sir, stand down." Marcus raised the Ka-bar, not in a defensive posture, in a salute. Blade vertical. Edge forward. The way soldiers present arms. The wolf's ears came forward. Confusion. Or maybe understanding. Marcus spoke. Loud enough for the wolf to hear over the rotors. Loud enough for Danny to hear, wherever he was. "He tested me. I passed. We're done here." The wolf didn't move. Yellow eyes locked on the blade. And then Marcus did something that made no tactical sense. He reversed his grip on the Ka-bar, held it by the blade edge cutting into his palm, extended the handle toward the wolf, offering the weapon. Handle first. The way warriors do when they acknowledge an equal. Blood ran down his wrist, his own blood mixing with Danny's from hours ago. The PJ hissed into his radio. Subject is hypothermic. Possible altered mental status. 10 seconds. 20. The wolf's posture shifted. Head came up. Ears relaxed. Then it turned. Walked into the darkness. The pack followed. Marcus stood there, blood dripping. The car bar still extended. The PJ grabbed him. "Sir, we need to go." Marcus nodded, let himself be pulled toward the helicopter. His hand was bleeding badly, now deep cut across the palm from gripping the blade. Inside the Bell, it was controlled chaos. Crew chief strapped him in. Someone wrapped a thermal blanket around his shoulders. The flight medic grabbed his bleeding hand. "What the hell did you do?" Marcus looked down at the car bar, still in his left hand. The blade was slick with blood, his and Danny's, mixed together now. "Made a promise," he said. The medic didn't understand. Didn't matter. The pilot pulled pitch. The Bell lifted. The wreckage fell away below, just a black hole in the earth now. Flames extinguished. Danny was gone. The Cessna was gone. But the knife remained. When you have a deep laceration and no proper medical supplies, you use what's available. Direct pressure first always. Use the cleanest cloth you have. Elevation if possible. In freezing temps, cold actually helps vasoconstriction, slows bleeding. The medic used an Israeli bandage from the aircraft kit, wrapped Marcus's hand tight. Would need stitches later. But the immediate crisis was controlled. Rule of survival medicine. Stop the dying. Then treat the wounds. Marcus wasn't dying anymore. The wound could wait. The flight medic checked vitals. Pupils. Pulse. Respiratory rate. Asked questions: name, date, location. Marcus Harrison, October 14th, somewhere over Alaska. Close enough. Combat medic smile. You're going to be okay. Marcus looked out the window. The tundra rolled beneath them. In the distance, weather moving in wall of gray-black cloud. 15 minutes later, and that front would have grounded everything. The medic was talking. Bethel Regional Hospital, X-rays, observation. But Marcus wasn't listening. He was looking at the car bar. The engraving was visible now. Blood had filled the worn letters, making them readable for the first time in years. DK. Brotherhood 87. "That's one hell of a knife," the medic said. Marcus nodded. "It belonged to the pilot. He gave it to me in 87. Told me to bring it back from whatever hell I ended up in." The medic looked at him differently, understanding. "You brought it back." Marcus ran his thumb over the engraving. "Yeah, I did." The helicopter banked south, Bethel's lights on the horizon. The knife had outlived 3 generations of warriors. Tonight, it had outlived one more, and written one more name into its steel. Marcus Harrison, Alaska, 2015. The blade story wasn't over, but this chapter was. Marcus Harrison spent 2 nights in Bethel Regional Hospital. Diagnosis: 3 fractured ribs, grade 2 concussion, stage 1 hypothermia, severe laceration to right palm, requiring 18 stitches, minor frostbite on 3 fingers. He was discharged with pain medication and a psych-eval recommendation. He declined the eval. Danny Kruger's body was recovered 4 days later when the weather cleared and divers could safely enter the sinkhole. Full military honors, Marine Corps burial detail. His family asked Marcus to speak at the service. He did. He talked about brotherhood, about legacies that outlive men, about a knife that had survived Iwo Jima and Vietnam and Beirut and 3 American wars in the Middle East, and about how Danny had saved his life twice, once in 1987 by giving him the blade, and once in 2015 when that same blade cut him free from death. At the end of the service, Marcus approached Danny's son, a Marine lieutenant, 23 years old, fresh from his first deployment. He held out the car bar. "This belonged to your great-grandfather, then your grandfather, then your father. He gave it to me when I needed it. Now I'm giving it to you." The lieutenant's hand trembled as he took the knife. "Sir, I can't." "You can, and you will." Marcus's voice was firm. "This blade has a job. It keeps warriors alive. Your turn to carry it." The young Marine nodded, couldn't speak. Marcus walked away. His belt felt lighter without the car bar's weight. But the weight on his chest was gone too. Your most important survival tool isn't on your belt. It's between your ears. The car bar didn't survive 22 years of combat and 1 night in Alaska because it was the most expensive knife, or the sharpest, or the most tactical. It survived because the men who carried it, maintained it, trusted it, knew it. Survival isn't about having the best gear. It's about having gear you've trained with so thoroughly that using it becomes unconscious. reflexive, muscle memory. Marcus survived because when his conscious brain was shutting down from hypothermia and concussion, his hands still knew what to do. Cut the seatbelt, build the fire, process the wood, signal the rescue. Those weren't decisions. They were patterns, engraved as deeply into his nervous system as Danny's initials were engraved into the steel. That's what preparation means. Not hoarding equipment in your basement, not watching YouTube videos, not buying the latest tactical gear. It means training until the tool becomes an extension of your body, until you can use it in the dark, in the cold, when you're hurt and scared, and everything is going wrong. Because the wilderness doesn't care about your gear list. The cold doesn't negotiate. And when it matters, when seconds separate life from death, you won't rise to the occasion. You'll default to your training. Make sure that training is worth defaulting to. Your mission. Find one tool. Knife, multi-tool, fire starter, compass doesn't matter. Learn it. Actually learn it. Not internet learning. Real learning. Use it until your hands know it better than your eyes do. Because one day you might need it when your eyes don't work anymore. And on that day, the tool that's saved you won't be the expensive one. It'll be the one you trusted enough to master. Preparation is a mindset. Survival is a tactic. This is Expert Survival Guide. Stay sharp. Stay ready. And when you find your blade, never let it go.